Imagine a world that feels both alien and familiar. A single giant landmass crowned Pangea, seas stretching farther than your eye can imagine, and life picking up the pieces after Earth's worst ever extinction. That world is the Triassic Period, the opening act of the Mesozoic Era, lasting roughly 50 million years from about 252 to 201 million years ago. It's a chapter of reset, experimentation, and slow building drama that sets the stage for the age of dinosaurs. Let's take a relaxed, honest stroll through what made the Triassic so important, surprising, and sometimes downright strange. Start by picturing time. The Triassic begins right after the Permian Triassic extinction, the great die-off that cleared the ecological slate. Think of whole ecosystems broken and reorganizing. The Triassic is the recovery, a time when survivors, new arrivals, and evolutionary experiments competed for space. It's the shortest period of the Mesozoic, but boy, it's packed. Geology in the big picture, Pangea and the seas. At the start of the Triassic, almost all the continents were glued together into Pangea, this supercontinent-shaped climate, ocean currents, and the movement of species. Surrounding Pangea was the immense Panthalassa Ocean, and tucked into the continent's arc was the Tethys Sea. Land masses that later became familiar, North America, Europe, Africa, India, were all neighbors in that supercontinent. Toward the end of the Triassic, stress on the crust began to pull Pangea apart, hinting at the Atlantic's future and eventually triggering huge volcanic events. Sea levels during the Triassic were generally lower than in many other times, but they fluctuated. Small rises and drops over millions of years created changing shorelines and habitats. For much of the Triassic, the interior of Pangea was hot and dry, with vast deserts across the heart of the supercontinent. But around the edges, especially near the Tethys, things could be more humid, and occasional wet spells reshaped ecosystems. Climate and atmosphere, hot, seasonal, and occasionally dramatic. The Triassic climate had a strong continental feel, very seasonal, with sweltering summers and cooler winters inland. The huge size of Pangea damped down oceanic moderation, so the central areas were arid. Polar regions, surprisingly, weren't frozen wastelands. They could be temperate enough to support forests and vertebrates. The planet swung through warmer and cooler pulses. The early Triassic was extremely hot as Earth recovered from volcanic greenhouse effects, while later intervals cooled and warmed again. The Carnian pluvial event, for example, was a noteworthy stretch of increased rainfall and humidity. Around the middle of the Triassic, which transformed landscapes and triggered ecological reshuffling. Life after the crash, 3 groups in the fossil record. Fossils from the Triassic fall into 3 broad groups. First, there are survivors, the lineages that crawled, swam, or drifted through the extinction and persisted. Second, there are early success stories that rose and fell within the Triassic itself. And third, there are lineages that evolved during this time and went on to dominate later eras. That diversity is part of what makes the Triassic so fascinating. Plants, from chaos to canopy. Immediately after the Permian demise, plant communities were shaken. The typical coal-forming swamp plants of the Permian largely disappeared, producing what paleobotanists call the coal gap in the early Triassic. Early on, hardy plants like lycophytes, think of columnar pluramia, took advantage of open niches. As the Triassic progressed, more modern groups spread. Conifers rose in prominence, and in Gondwana, seed ferns like Dicrudium built up great forests. Ginkgo relatives diversified, and bennytails, odd seed plants that looked a little like cyclic palm-like things, became more common in the late Triassic. By the end of the period, the groundwork for Mesozoic plant communities was established. Marine life, recovery and innovation. In the oceans, recovery was gradual but creative. Ammonites, the coiled cephalopods, bounced back and diversified. Bivalves expanded. Corals formed new but smaller reef systems than those of earlier ages, and new groups of plankton took over the marine food web. Fish diversified. Ray-finned fishes, the ancestors of most modern fishes, coelacanths, and early relatives of modern teleosts appeared. Sharks and shark-like hybodonts swam in both marine and freshwater settings. Marine reptiles arrived and diversified too, with ichthyosaurs and early plesiosaurs prowling the seas later in the Triassic. Amphibians and early lissamphibians, temnospondyle amphibians, many of them huge aquatic predators, survived into the Triassic. Some, like Mastodonsaurus, could reach several meters in length. But while temnospondyls continued to thrive for much of the Triassic, the earliest ancestors of modern amphibians, frogs, salamanders, and caecilians, also began to appear, quietly moving toward the forms we recognize today. Reptiles take center stage. This is where things really get exciting. Archosauromorphs, the group that includes archosaurs, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, crocodile-line reptiles, and their relatives, radiated during the Triassic. They filled many ecological roles, from nimble runners to massive predators. Early in the period, reptile groups like rhynchosaurs and allocotosaurs dominated many landscapes as herbivores with specialized jaws. Proterosaurs, including the oddly long-necked Tanystropheus, added bizarre body plans to the mix. Among archosauriforms, robust erythrosuchids were apex predators in the early Triassic. By the late Triassic, true archosaurs had branched into two important lineages: the crocodile line, Pseudosuchia, and the bird line, Avmetatarsalia. Pseudosuchians were especially dominant in many Triassic ecosystems. Armored atosaurs grazed on low vegetation, and Rawasuchians filled the top predator roles that later would be occupied by large theropod dinosaurs. Some Pseudosuchians were bulky and quadrupedal, others sleek and bipedal. Early crocodilomorphs, the ancestors of modern crocodilians, first emerged in small, agile forms toward the end of the Triassic. Dinosaurs, small beginnings. Dinosaurs first appeared in the late Triassic, but they were not yet the tidal actors of land ecosystems. Early dinosaurs were generally small and not numerous. Famous examples like Coelophysis were nimble, two-legged predators about the size of a large dog. Sauropodomorphs, early relatives of the gigantic sauropods that would dominate in the Jurassic, were present as well, often occupying cooler regions. Dinosaurs survived the end-Triassic shakeup and then soared in the Jurassic, but in the Triassic, they were still maturing as a group. Flying reptiles and marine explorers, pterosaurs evolved in the Triassic, becoming the first vertebrates to take powered flight. Early pterosaurs were long-tailed, lightweight flyers that would later diversify spectacularly. Among marine reptiles, plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs diversified, and placodonts, chunky, shell-crushing marine reptiles, adapted to special diets. Some marine reptiles, like Atopodentatus, even show surprising specializations, apparently adapted to scraping or cropping plant material. Synapsids in early mammals. Not all therapsid groups vanished with the Permian event. Dicynodonts, therocephalians, and cynodonts survived into the Triassic. Cynodonts are especially important. They're the lineage that gave rise to mammals. During the Triassic, small, more mammal-like cynodonts evolved and eventually led to the first true mammals in the late Triassic. These early mammalia forms were mostly small, nocturnal insectivores, probably furry and warm-blooded compared to their reptilian competitors. Their survival and later success may have been shaped by a Triassic world dominated by archosaurs. Local snapshots, Lagerstätten, and fossils that tell a story. The Triassic offers some fantastic fossil windows. The Monte San Giorgio deposits between Italy and Switzerland are Middle Triassic time capsules full of marine reptiles, fish, and even some terrestrial forms preserved in fine detail. Early Triassic Lagerstätten, like those found in China, show recovery in the seas not long after the Permian collapse. These exceptional sites help us understand how quickly ecosystems reassembled and how different groups experimented with new lifestyles. Eruptions, rifts, and the end of an era. As the Triassic drew to a close, tectonic forces that had been gathering strength began to break Pangea apart. Rifting along what would become the Central Atlantic created basins and chains of volcanic activity. The big moment came with the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, a massive volcanic pulse that released huge volumes of lava and gases as Pangea split. That volcanic episode is closely tied to the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event. Large amounts of carbon and sulfur released into the atmosphere likely led to short-term cooling, longer-term warming, ocean acidification, and other environmental stresses. The end Triassic extinction erased many groups, several marine invertebrates, many reptiles like large pseudosuchians and most labyrinthodont amphibians, while a handful of survivors, including many dinosaurs, cleared the path for the Jurassic world. Why the Triassic matters. The Triassic is the bridge between a devastated Permian Earth and the world of dinosaurs and mammals that dominates our cultural imagination. It's a story about recovery, adaptability, and evolutionary innovation. Many of the major players in later Mesozoic ecosystems, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, marine reptiles, and the lineages that led to mammals, either appeared or took crucial evolutionary steps during this period. It also shows how Earth systems, tectonics, volcanism, climate, and life interact over millions of years to reshape the planet. A few final takeaways. The Triassic lasted about 50 million years, from roughly 252 to 201 million years ago, and sits at the start of the Mesozoic era. It began after the biggest mass extinction in Earth's history and ended with another major extinction tied to continental breakup and massive volcanism. Pangea dominated the planet, creating extreme continental climates and setting the stage for the distribution and evolution of species. Archosaurs diversified into many forms, and dinosaurs first appeared in the late Triassic but only later became dominant. Plants shifted from early Triassic opportunists like lycophytes to more modern conifers and seed plant groups that shaped Mesozoic landscapes. Marine life recovered and innovated. Ammonites, bivalves, marine reptiles, and new plankton groups reshaped ocean ecosystems. The Triassic story is one of resilience and reinvention. It's an era where evolutionary experiments were tried and either discarded or refined into lineages that would define the next geological chapters. So next time you imagine dinosaurs, remember their origin story starts here in the Triassic, a dynamic, sometimes harsh, often surprising slice of Earth's past. It's a reminder that life's history is rarely linear. It stumbles, rewires, and then goes on to paint whole new landscapes. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep time stroll. If you felt the Triassic's heartbeat, the pulse of a recovering planet, that's exactly what makes it such a compelling chapter in Earth's long story. Music swells and fades out,